And I think obviously the municipalities have to take their role and open up planning processes to allow for smart people and smart ideas to be included in the making of our cities. We are all architects, we're all urban designers. We should all be involved and engaged in our environment, and that will help us build better cities.
Smart City, what is it about? Thank you so much for giving your valuable time to listen to Urbanistica podcast season number 2. I am Mustafa Sharif, an urban planner, and you're more than welcome to join my big journey of exploring the making of smarter and more livable cities. Don't forget to follow our Instagram account to see the stories behind the scenes, and also subscribe the YouTube channel to see the live talks. Let's get in touch on LinkedIn, share your reflections with us, with Urbanistica community, recommend the podcast to people you think are interested in Urbanistica topics. Are you ready for a new episode? Let's go for it. Looking forward this episode, we're going to talk about how to design a good public space, what are the criteria to have in order to create a good place. I have the pleasure to welcome Andreas Lebisch to Urbanistica podcast. Hey and welcome, Andreas.
Hi, thanks for having me.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I cycled to work today, you can say, and it's a wonderful day in Stockholm, and I appreciate living in the city.
That's amazing. So how many minutes?
It took me 40 minutes roughly to cycle in, and you could wish for, I suppose, sometimes better cycling connections in town, but it's also about the way how you experience the city. And I think cycling is one of the funnest and best ways actually to take in the city and take in this landscape.
Yes, of course. Do you find it easy to bike here in Stockholm, or you struggle with that?
It's never easy anywhere, I think. Either there's too many bikes in Holland, for example, or there's too many cars in every other city I know. But I think it's a lot about how people interact with cars and bikes that actually makes a difference. So we can make very big cycle lanes, and that's a good start. But I think there has to be a prioritization of, or we have to prioritize bikes more.
Yeah, great. Well, Andreas, you are the storyteller of this episode. Thank you so much for giving your time and soon for inspiring us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So the stage is yours. How would you like to introduce yourself, and please tell us what are you passionate about?
Well, I am an architect, an urban designer. I live and work in Stockholm with my wife and 2 kids. The kids don't work yet, but they are interested in landscape and architecture questions. It's always a big question in our family, and I think that's fun actually to share. I actually grew up in Vienna, in Austria, and studied there as well. Lucky to have an international education, and then going on to the technical university to become an architect. After that, I thought, well, it would be interesting to reach out a little bit more to urbanism. So I enrolled to postgraduate in Columbia University in New York, but never ended up going there because I actually moved to London instead and got or was lucky enough to join Will Alsop Architects as my first proper job. I had a couple before in Vienna, but like this is always a life-changing job. Will Alsop is a architect like no other. He's a radical rebel. He's an artist. He's an enfant terrible, as they often called him. He died actually 2 years ago, so sorry to say, because he also had an unhealthy lifestyle. But he was a painter and he built buildings on stilts with like colorful blobs hanging off them. He definitely influenced me and everyone else that worked with him in the way that we think about architecture and what it can or cannot be, or what it can be, period. It was an interesting time in the UK, early 2000s. It was a very optimistic time. We had interesting projects both in cities and architecture. And from there on, I think the way of interacting and cooperating as well with communities and collaborating with other practices became a big thing. So it wasn't called placemaking back then, but it was something that was definitely placemaking. That we engaged local communities, we talked to local housing associations, and then we plonked a plan on top of it. But at least we were there and constantly talked and showed our ideas to them. So that was an interesting time. After that, I joined another very great placemaker and urban designer, David West, and joined Studio Agri West, which is now a very active big firm in London that's getting a lot of high-profile projects. So it's very interesting to follow up what they're doing. About 10 years ago, like you, I moved to Stockholm and lucky now to work both on industrial and residential buildings, in detail and in urban design scale. So it's a little bit interested in everything, you could say.
Yeah, that's a very inspiring journey from Vienna, UK, Stockholm. Are you going to a new city in the future as well?
I don't know. We don't have plans for it
So far.
So far, the thing is, the more you move, no, the longer your life goes on, the heavier you become. So it's harder to move with kids and the rest of it. But of course, it's possible, and we've done it before. So who knows?
I understand. So your passion is about engaging community, if I understand you correctly.
Yes, I am passionate about great design. I'm passionate about design combined with sustainability. There's three ways of defining sustainability. It's economic and environmental and social sustainability. And good design needs all three of these, especially if we are building big objects involving a lot of people and a lot of resources. We have to plan in these types of sustainability from the beginning. And so social sustainability is all about looking at who is involved and who can or should be involved, the stakeholders, bringing those to the table, looking at a place and what are the what are the main factors that are already there and you can work on and improve. So that's one of the important passions I have, you can say. The other is, of course, great design, where you combine architecture and great places to create the whole package, right? That a city is. So when you say passion, maybe you can also just call it I love cities, and I think we share that passion.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Loving cities. So when did everything start, your passion? Is it when you were studying or meanwhile you're traveling in the cities and working in different studios?
Well, it's a good question because it's something that accumulates over time, and I think one of the biggest moments where I couldn't believe what I was seeing. We traveled a lot to New York, and one of the first times we arrived at JFK, you take the cab, you cross the East River, and you come in to the city on the fifth or sixth floor of the bridge, the height of the bridge. and there is a canyon of buildings all around you. So just this incredible three-dimensional aspect and this positive optimism of we can build a mass of buildings and make it this cool and interesting was definitely a life-turning thing for me in terms of agreeing that it is possible and that we are doing the right thing here and that we can. Um, so that was one of the main, I think, influences you can say early on that changed my outlook
Yeah,
to architecture.
yeah. So now, as an architect, how do you define a good place?
Mhm. A good place is a place for people. That is sort of the central argument in what is a good place workshop or seminar that we had. And a good place attracts people and provides opportunity for them to do things and meet other people. That doesn't mean that a good place isn't just as well for people to do nothing and just look at other people or do nothing at all. That is important as well. Um, but it's interesting to see that there is a difference between the places in the city that we live in. Some are very popular and always full of life and interesting to be in, and then there's others that are empty. And I think we can learn from these examples as we do, and not that doesn't mean to make all our places full, but actually to give it a chance to have people enjoying these places more. And in what's interesting in our times now, we have a pandemic going on, and we're realizing that this virus creates a sort of special situation for society. And public spaces and parks are very important for sort of creating an opening for us to be outside and to meet at a distance, but actually to be outside. And there's a big pressure on public spaces, as you know. And I think that's also a pointer to what happens when things go wrong to our society. We need to be um, robust enough to deal with certain situations, and public places take a big space in this position in terms of we have to go out and demonstrate, we have to go out and communicate outside the digital channels, and we also we need places to celebrate. So all of these things point to the importance of the democratic aspect of places as well.
Yeah. Do we have a kind of recipe or criteria that if we apply them in a place, then we get a good place?
Yeah, we defined 8 principles. I'm not saying that this is the Bible of public spaces, but we sort of, after research and workshops with quite a few communities, municipalities, and builders, and so on, we sort of boiled down sort of universal tools, you could say, of making good spaces, or making a space to become a place. This this doesn't mean that there aren't differences between places, right? And maybe you're going to ask that later on, but um, there are universal principles that all places share. It's a bit like people, we're all unique, but we have a lot of common DNA that makes us very similar in many ways. And these sort of principles are the ones that we were looking at, not the geographical, cultural, and regional differences that, of course, every place has. But we were looking at these principles, or you could say values of what makes a good place.
Yeah. And before you start with these values, can you break it down for us? What are the difference between, or what is the difference between a space and a place? In a
Sorry.
really simple way.
Well, that is what it is. I mean, the simplicity is what I like about it. Space is just something that exists, right? Even places exist, of course, but to turn a space into a place takes takes time, takes effort, and basically it takes love of people that are there and enjoy the place. And it's a little bit like we were talking about soft values. It's a bit about the fact that people need to care for something to make it better and to appreciate it more. And I think that you can see that in many examples that some places are just not cared for. They are not being used, and those are spaces, I would say. They're also just leftover spaces, for example, industrial, infrastructural spaces. But everything, I think, can be turned into a place if we think it's worthwhile.
Yes. So how do we turn a space to a place?
Good question. There's a whole process that goes into this, of course, right? So I'm not going to dive too deeply into the whole process of interaction and stakeholders and so on. But we looked in our study, we looked at more the creative aspect, how you define a good place and how you turn a space into a place. And we came up with these eight tools, you could say. And I don't know if we have enough time to go through all of them, but shoot, we can go quite briefly. And I want to start with I think, one of the most important aspects, and that is the mix. The mix of the place is what actually attracts people in many levels the most of all. It's the mix of functions, the mix of activities, the mix of old and new buildings. Authenticity is quite an important part of it. So you can't just build everything new and expect it to be attractive from the first instant, or it will take a while. Look at Hammarby Sjöstad. It takes 10 years to become authentic and people to accept it. But it's good to have a mix from the beginning, and that will also create essentially a mix of people and a side by side of people that maybe from the start wouldn't have met. And it's this by chance side by side which creates opportunity of meeting and interaction, which is extremely important for our communities, and I think is also what people appreciate a lot about good places. Then there, of course, is very briefly now, but there's of course is the problem of um, that we might have conflict of interests when we are so close to each other. But instead of being afraid of conflict, we should try to promote the working out of places, or the compromise and problem solving of a good place.
You mean conflict between the neighbors, the business owners, the landowners?
Yes, all of the above. And basically, just if you have loads of activities side by side, of course, there's room and noise and whatever issues. But if you don't talk to each other, then um, the conflict just grows. So what a good place does, it gives an opportunity to settle things here and there, and it creates a better communication between people. So that is one of the key aspects, I think, of our finding, that a mix of things is like central for a good place. Then briefly work with the flows. That means that a place needs different ways of coming to a place. So you need obviously be able to walk, cycle, take a scooter, take public transport or a car. And then we also need to prioritize these modes of transports, and we got to give as much room as possible to the slow modes of transport to be able to slow down a place. This is also something that Jan Gehl talks about. And for a place to work, we need to slow down and be able to have space to actually be and sit in. Provide for human needs is another one. And because we are creating places for people, it's simple. We need to sit somewhere, we need to eat, drink, and go to the toilet. And it's surprising how little of our places actually provide for these needs outside of a commercial activity as well, of course. Then there is art and creativity, incredibly important to open up for creative aspect of creating spaces, but also occupying spaces with art. And then there's the aspect of triangulation, which William White talks about, which means that if you go to a space and you see something that is so incredible, you just start talking to the person that's next to you. So that is a way of communicating to strangers, which is really useful. Um, think about the microclimate is about that we can manipulate our microclimate by shelter, by wind, taking into account temperature, wind, sun, shady places, cool in the summer, warm in the winter. There's a lot of ways we can manipulate and make people feel more comfortable. It's simple enough. We need place for recreation and play. We need places to jump, to climb, to run. Obviously, the kids need space to go out and be in a place where also grown-ups like to be, and old people. So there's the mix of that. Age is incredibly important. And then there is another aspect called temporality, or everything is temporary. So there's two aspects to this. One is that we design places from seasons and from day and night aspect, so that there is a program or something to do and see throughout the day and into the evening, you would say. Plus that you can structure a place or program a place seasonally, which means that you then the next year just repeat that program. So it's easy enough to program a place temporality wise, but temporarity is something that you use tactic urbanism, for example, temporary installations, art, and events to create an interest in a place and start a dialogue and test out things. So that's a whole other subject that's very interesting, and is something that is growing as a subject in urban design. And then last but not least, we need to add nature to our urban spaces. If there isn't already a lot of nature in it, we need to bring it in. It's about biodiversity, and it's about we wanting to be close to trees and feel good in our green environment.
Mm. So these criteria generate a good place of a space. Is it possible to have all of them in one space?
Of course it is. And I think to a larger or lesser degree, they usually are. Sometimes they're completely missing. And I'm not saying that it's a checklist for everyone to go to ICA and buy all 8 principles, right? But I think if you do look at these aspects, you're probably not going to go completely wrong. At the same time, I would say careful, it's not something that's going to automatically create a place that works. Places are also about where they are in location to other places, what's around them, and so on. But we have a good method, I think, to start to work with places, both existing and new, if we incorporate them into a placemaking process, which is sort of the larger picture of this.
Yeah. And especially here in Scandinavia or in Sweden, when you mentioned the seasonality. So, 6 months of winter and darkness and then 6 months of sunlight. How do we deal with winter in a place? Is it possible?
Yeah, it's interesting because Sweden and the Nordic countries are a special case. It's very dark for a very long time of the year. The weather is inhospitable, and we are indoors most of the time, right? So there's two things I think. First of all, that doesn't mean that we should disregard our open spaces. They're incredibly important. But also, we should think about how our private spaces, indoor spaces, meet our public spaces. So that the connection between indoor and outdoor becomes incredibly important. Are you going to be indoor for 6 months of the year and look onto a hedge? Or are you going to look out to another side of the street where there's activity? So our public spaces are very important, and our spaces in between the buildings are very important in terms of how we deal with loneliness and sociability. And they have a very important role in this. And on the other hand, we in the Nordic countries we love nature, and we are outdoors even when it's cold and dark and freezing because we know how to get dressed and we know how to prepare and we love to be outside anyhow. So there is I think the connection of taking people outside into nature, making places for them in nature, and also making places in cities attractive enough even in the wintertime. So there's a couple of points.
Yeah, yeah. Do you believe that we should bring back the nature to the city or bring the city back to the nature?
That's interesting. I think we should bring the nature into the city and not move the city into the nature. Um, there's a bigger point to this. More than half of our global population is now living in cities. In the next 30 years, it's going to be two-thirds of the population. 66% of us are going to be living in cities. On top of that, our population is going to double in the next 30 years. At least that's the prediction right now. So that's going to create a huge amount of pressure on our resources and the land use of our planet. So if we keep taking more space and more space, we're definitely not going to survive.
Yeah.
So what we have to do is we have to concentrate and consolidate our cities as they are, and we are creating mega cities and we're creating megalopolises now, which means that there is an incredible opportunity here to do good placemaking and good city urban design for this, well, not only opportunity but our only chance to for the next 20-30 years to balance out the growth of our population.
Yes, exactly. We need to be smarter.
Yeah.
And when it comes to be smart, sometimes in many of the cases, you don't have the enough budget to go to have all the elements that you mentioned to have this perfect process of designing a place. So, is there a way to prioritize some of the elements and leave some of the others, or how should we think?
Mhm. Um, I don't really always agree with the cost argument. I think our places have to be generous because um, there is just like with companies and shops and restaurants, there's a competition between places. So if you want to do a place well, you need to attract and offer something that is a bit special for people to be interested. Otherwise, they'll go to the next place. So there is that core of making a good place. And then there is also, it has to be robust. You, as landscape architect, you know we need to build things properly so that they work for a long time and we're not scared to break things and we don't have to go in and fix them because that's where economic sustainability comes in. We need to do it properly and it'll last longer. So I think the economic question has two sides, of course, as everything does.
Mm. And whose responsibility to have these elements in a place? Is it the art? Let's say the architect, the landscape architect, the landowner?
Mhm.
Who's responsible to create a really good place?
Well, of course we are, and of course the authorities are, and of course the people have to be involved. So there's a big group of stakeholders that need to be addressed. Um, but I think in Sweden especially, the municipality has a very big democratic responsibility, whereby they have to address all the different population groups, organizations, governmental bodies, regional organizations, the transport and infrastructure issues, environmental questions, planning, laws, building regulations, and so on and so on. So they have a big responsibility. But they also need to create and review and grant approval of comprehensive plans, development plans, and building approvals. So, and on top of all that, they have the plan monopolet, which means that only the municipalities are allowed to design our cities. And no wonder they have too much to do and are short of resources, right? So I genuinely question the purpose of the plan monopoly and suggest that the municipality becomes a curator of plans for the city. Instead, open up the plan process and pick and choose good ideas from those that are willing to propose them. This would create opportunities for a shift in the planning process and a very important step in the inclusive planning process of our cities.
Does it cost so much to design a good place?
I think again, it's about who's involved. If we all sign up through a process of involvement, if we all sign up to something that we want, then we can separate, or then we can divide up the costs as well. So we need organizations involved, we need the people that are going to use it, and we need the companies and of course the authority backing it. But this is obviously a quite iterative process, and it's messy and it's tricky, and no one really wants to work too long and hard. But this is what it takes, and once we sign up for it, the money is also going to come in.
Do you think it's important to have everything fixed in the beginning instead of figuring out how the plan should be? If you understand my question.
Yeah, no, it's really good. I think there's again two sides to it. We need to keep spaces flexible, but not too flexible because then they become anonymous, right? So there is a sense of flexibility in a place and a sense of true, authentic personality. And at the same time, we need to keep in mind that nothing is fixed, right? So of course, we are maybe a place is fixed in its location, but things will always develop over time. And placemaking is a continual process. Urban design is a continual process, and architecture is an ongoing story as well.
Yeah, super interesting. Thank you so much. It was really inspiring to even we didn't go to the details, but it was very inspiring to talk about these elements. Thank you so much again.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
And as you know, in this podcast, we explore a bit the just the surface of what is a smart city. So I'm also interested to get your point of view. How you define a smart city? What is it about for you?
Right. Well, technology and the city is, I think, a relatively important or a very important connection into how we can plan our cities in the future. Our computers, our smart devices, phones, etc. They are starting to collect data about how we interact, how we move, how we use and consume things, and in terms of the global situation of big cities, this is an incredible tool of helping us understand certain phenomena and analyzing these as well. And then there's another tool that is starting to develop, and it's parametric design, which means you can iterate 1,000 different possible designs within an instant, which would take us years to do as a normal human being, right? So we have a very powerful tool here to test things and at the same time analyze them. Um, but we have to be careful. We can't allow ourselves to think that the programs will design places for us. We have to be wise and effective, selective, and pick the things that we know are better for us, people. I don't think computer programs can do that, but they can help, and they are definitely a tool to understand the incredible complexity of what's going on in our cities today, for example.
Yeah, so if so you don't imagine, let's say in 30 years, that you just click and the software will provide you with a plan, design, details of a good place. You don't really trust this. I mean, if we talk about machine learning, that collecting data, analyzing, so the program will understand what is good for us. So, but still, you don't really believe 100% that the software will provide us with the perfect place.
I don't have a mirror ball, so I don't know. Maybe artificial intelligence is going to be so advanced that we basically can just lean back and everything's done for us. Somehow, I'm a little bit skeptical in believing that things are too good to be true, because they usually are. I think we need to work harder to, first of all, understand these mechanisms and then to use them in the best way. And then we're going to be more and more um, pressured. Also, pressured is the wrong word, but our role is going to be the creative side and the curating side. So we are going to be selecting the thousands of iterations that can be done, and maybe directing the process of design into the right directions. So our roles are going to be even more important in terms of um, design lead and design selection.
Yeah. Do you think Stockholm is a smart city?
No, I don't think any city is smart in terms of. It's also incredibly stupid. And these tools are just coming, right? We're just starting to work with them. I think it's incredibly interesting seeing flows of people um, from the mobile data that we have, or capturing a virus spread by our technology. I think the application is going to be very big, and especially in terms of how we build our cities and how we do waste management, how we do energy efficiency, how we deal with the big resource questions and space questions. Um, all of that it's going to be an incredible important tool. I just don't want to be over optimistic. I think most of the responsibility should and still is in our on our side, on the human side of the picture.
Yeah. And if we go back in time by the time machine and you are allowed to change one thing from the urban planning and design point of view, just one thing, what will you change?
This was a really interesting question, and I thought about it for a long time. I don't think I would go in your time machine and change anything, because the outcome could be so varied that it's very difficult to predict if it was a good change or not. But I would definitely use your time machine, and I would want to go to see cities in back in time. And for example, how was London at the height of the industrial age? Right, so many things happened at the same time. The the growth, the explosion of growth was intense. How did people and how did the building industry, you could say, keep up? Or going even further back to the ancient times of places like Babylon and ancient Rome, incredibly important places to see and how people lived back then. How was their architecture? How was their urban design? Even though it wasn't a a proper field of work back then, they made incredible cities. Or going to Beijing in the 1500s with a city that all of a sudden turned to 1 million inhabitants. How did that affect people and the way they lived? So there's a lot to look at.
Yeah, of course. Very interesting. If let's say if we are back in time and we talk about a good place, do you think we will have almost the same elements that we are having now that you just told of us?
Yes, I think the principal elements have always been there, and there was maybe different ways that we approached it. Back then, we didn't design our places; they just sort of emerged, right, from our way of building houses, and then our need to use spaces in between them, our need to go and fetch water from the well, our need to go and set up a stand and sell our fruits and vegetables, and so on and so forth. So there was a lot more organic growth. When in the turn of the 19th century we started to plan our cities, cities started to become something completely different. But it was important to be able to encompass that many people, of course. Having said that, I think people started planning cities much earlier, but there was like a sort of a formal urban design theory. And now I think we're starting to understand that cities, no matter what, they grow organically. But we have certain tools and mechanisms to either make a place work or not. And I think that is what we need to focus more on and use our time and energy to create better cities.
Yeah. And what will you add if we go by this time machine to the future? Also, one thing.
Wow. Yeah, I haven't thought about that at all. But of course, it would be interesting to see how we've developed. Are we still around as a human race? Have we actually doubled in population? Have we moved together in cities, or are we spread out all over the world? Um, so they're just sheer curiosity, because I don't think anyone can really predict um, what and how is the future of the city, except that and now there's another idea that I was thinking about, is that cities are becoming stronger. They're actually becoming more important than countries slowly. So I think I believe in the political and economic sovereignty of cities, almost in terms of city states, and that cities are slowly outdoing countries in terms of importance in the role of organizing people, and also in the role of communicating and collaborating. This is something interesting to watch. Maybe that in the future we are not going to talk about we're going to this or this country. We're only going to be going from this to this city, and that the role of cities is going to definitely grow as a central place of governance and power.
Yeah.
Actually,
And of course, it's a big question, but briefly, do you think it's good or bad that cities are taking the leads and not the country?
I think it's very good because cities have a much better overview, more or less, of the space that they occupy and the people. Countries can be very big in many ways and messy. So, for example, social and humanitarian efforts can be very difficult when we are dealing with too many people. So cities have a sort of inbuilt robustness that can deal with these questions, and we also giving over more land to maybe nature to come back if more and more people choose to move to cities and create bigger metropolises.
Yeah, very interesting. Again, thank you so much, Andreas, for the inspiring episode.
Thank you, Mustafa.
So, how would you like to, if we say to summarize what we talked about, your reflections and 3 takeaway messages for the listeners?
Again, I thought about this, and I think one of the messages I want to give is that we are all architects. We're all urban designers. We should all be involved and engaged in our environment, and that will help us build better cities. So that's one. And I think obviously the municipalities have to take their role and open up planning processes to allow for smart people and smart ideas to be included in the making of our cities. And then the third takeaway message is that we should build car-free cities rather than self-driving cars.
Thank you so much. So, what is going to be the next step for you?
I'm looking forward to working with placemaking and reconnecting with the municipalities and the developers that we started this project together, and also working with others that are interested in building better places and building a good city.
Yes, wish you a really great, beautiful, and warm summer.
Yes, thank you.
Do you have a plan where you're gonna be in Sweden?
We are going to southern Sweden, and we're staying in the countryside, which is a nice vacation away from the city, but also creating that bond to nature and then loading up on a lot of fresh air and sunny days so that we can come back to Stockholm and live the winter, you know.
Sounds amazing. Well, Andreas, I need also 3 hashtags for the episode.
I was thinking about either city state or hashtag city power, because in terms of future reference, we're going to need cities more. And then hashtag technology for people, not the other way around. And then hashtag opportunity through collaboration.
Wow. The one with the technology for people, very catchy.
Mm-hmm.
It's like cities for people, but now it's this technology for people.
Yeah, exactly. I think we have to keep in mind what we're doing this for, and we're not doing it for. In many projects, other issues become big, like cars and parking and property boundaries and so on and so forth. We have to remember always that we're doing it for us, for people.
Yes. Thank you so much, and hopefully see you in the next coming episode.
Thank you, Mustafa.
And thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica podcast. Please follow Instagram account and subscribe the YouTube channel. If you have any great story that makes our city smarter, please contact me. Urbanistica has been produced in collaboration with Landskapslaget, working with landscape architecture, urban planning and design, based in Stockholm, and also Placemaking Europe Network. I am Mustafa Sharif. Keep up the good work, keep loving cities.